Shabbat Shalom. Sometimes I feel like if anyone looks at what's going on in Washington, D.C. and isn't embarrassed by what they see on both sides of the aisle, that if they're not embarrassed by what they see, they must not be paying very close attention. It's been quite a week in Washington, D.C., and it started off, in fact, just this last Shabbat. We had this incredible march. Many people, we won't argue over numbers. We don't argue over numbers. But nevertheless, we had as part of that some rioting that took place as well. And I'm sure you saw caught on camera one of the, I don't remember if he was a neo-Nazi leader or a white supremacist leader, but one of the marchers came up and while this man was on camera, quite literally punched him in the face. This is something about which we should be proud. This is how we express our American values. And on the other side of the aisle, we have one of the presidential spokespeople, someone who works for the president, Kellyanne Conway, who in this great and very important debate about how many people showed up on Inauguration Day, expressed the incredible wisdom that you can't, I'm going to paraphrase, it's pretty close to what she said. You can't quantify numbers. You can't quantify numbers. If we're not looking at Washington, D.C., all of us, and embarrassed by what's going on both sides of the aisle, we're not paying careful enough attention. And so now we are once again having the conversation about the refugee crisis, frankly, throughout the world, but dominated in large part by people fleeing the Middle East, Syria, and the outspread of all of the crisis and war that's happening there. And there's rumor taking place that just as in the previous administration, President Obama ramped up refugees by tens of thousands, that President Trump is thinking about halting all refugees, perhaps entirely, or at least from these areas in the Middle East, halting visas from several countries while we consider security measures. He hasn't done anything, but this is what people are talking about. And so with this idea of refugees on our mind, I wanted to take a moment and reflect on some of the Jewish laws that have to do with this question of the refugee situation in the world. Now, we know that saving a life is of utmost Jewish value. We know that caring for others is a central Jewish value. And so as we wrestle with what do we do in light of this refugee situation, I wanted to pull forward some teachings from the Talmud that come to help us elucidate what is our obligation toward the other. And here I am on Masechet Sanhedrin that comes to teach, from where do we know that if one sees his fellow drowning in a river, or if he sees a wild beast ravaging him or bandits coming to attack him, that he is obligated to save the fellow? Now, what exactly is going on? The Talmud is having a question that if you see somebody drowning in a river, if you see someone being attacked by an animal, if you see someone whose life is at danger, what are you obligated to do? And the rabbis come to teach, one is obligated to save his fellow, because as Scripture teaches, you shall not stand by the blood of your friend. Our Torah comes to tell us you shall not stand by the blood of your friend. And because of that teaching in the Torah, the rabbis come to teach that we, each of us, all of us have an obligation when we see someone whose life is at risk to extend our hands and help to save them. This is a Jewish obligation. This is part of our legal codes, that if we see someone's life at risk, we have to reach out and extend our hand to help save them. Now, of course, there's an important question that needs to be asked. Do we need to save everybody? Is that upon us? And more so, the Talmud talks about if you see someone drowning in a river, or you see someone being attacked by a wild beast, do we need to save them? What if I can't swim? What if that animal that's attacking that other person could turn and attack me as well? What if that refugee whose life I am trying to save is actually a jihadist who may turn around and blow us up? Am I obligated to save the life of another by putting my own life at risk? Now here we might want to look to another section of our Talmud that offers some perspective on that as well. And here we come to learn, if two people are traveling along the way, perhaps in the desert, and one of them had in his possession a flask of water, right? Two people are wandering in the desert. There's no gas stations to buy Mountain Dew anywhere. And here they're wandering in the desert, and there's only one flask of water between them. If both drink from it, they'll both die, because there is not enough water to sustain both of them until they can reach more water. However, if only one of them drinks, he'll be able to reach a settlement where more water is available. What do we do? If both people drink from that same bottle of water, there won't be enough water. They'll both die. If only one of them drinks from the water, one of them will live, and the other one will surely die. Ben Petura preached concerning the above case, it's better that both should drink and die, and one of them should not witness the death of his fellow. It's better that they both should drink and die, rather than not witnessing the death of the another. How many agree with that statement? Okay, a handful. This teaching actually stood for many years, until the great Rabbi Akiva came along. Now, interestingly enough, how old was Rabbi Akiva when we began to study Torah? 40 years old. We won't go there. Until Rabbi Akiva came along and taught, the Torah states that your brother may live with you. This implies that your own life takes precedence over your fellow's life. Thus, the owner should hold all the water for himself to ensure his own survival. Your life takes precedence over your fellow's life. If extending your hand to save someone in need will put your life at risk, then it's a Jewish law, it's a Torah law for you not to do it. You have to preserve your own life first. But if we go back to the other book of the Talmud, we're reminded that if you see someone drowning in a river, or if you see someone being attacked by a wild beast, you're obligated to go in and save them. Well, whenever there's someone drowning in a river and you have to jump into the river, your life is at risk. Whenever there's a wild beast attacking another, and your obligation is to come in and save him, your life is at risk. So now we have a machloket. Now we have a rabbinic argument. What do we do? And I'm reminded by this week's Torah portion, Parashat Va-Era, that God sends Moses and Aaron to speak before Pharaoh. And of course, Moses is worried that Pharaoh is not going to believe that God is on their side, on the side of Moses and Aaron. And so they decide that they're going to perform miracles, and sure enough, there they are before Pharaoh. Pharaoh says, "Who are you coming before me that I should listen to you?" And Aaron throws down his walking stick, and what happens to the walking stick? That's right, it turns into a snake. You've seen the movie. It turns into a snake. And sure enough, Pharaoh's magicians take their walking sticks, they throw them down, and they too become snakes. Now Moses and Aaron, now God knows they're in for some tsuris. They've got some trouble ahead. So sure enough, the first plague is brought down by Moses and Aaron upon the Egyptians. And that first plague is blood. Dumb. Right? You know, you dip with your index finger, right? Not the teaspoon, not the pinky. You dip with your index finger. Dumb. Blood. And here Moses and Aaron thinks that This will surely persuade Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. But Pharaoh's magicians replicate the miracle. Pharaoh's unimpressed. And so the very next plague comes. Svardeya, frogs. Frog, it's an interesting midrash. We'll call it frogs. Svardeya. And here now Moses and Aaron think this plague will surely cause Pharaoh to let the people go. But what happens? The magicians of Pharaoh repeat the same miracle. So now we come to the third plague. Dam, Svardeya, Kinim. What is Kinim? Lice. I don't have the issue. I'm just trying to give you a hint. Lice. And here once again, Moses and Aaron say this is going to be the plague that convinces Pharaoh. And the magicians say, we can do that too. And the magicians fail to do it. The magicians fail to do it. And in failing to replicate this plague, the magicians finally come to say, you know what? Only God can do everything. In that moment, not Pharaoh, but his magicians came to believe that the only one really in control, the only one who knows the future, the only one who is omniscient and omnipotent is God. So here we now come back to our machloket. We know that we have a Torah obligation to save those whose lives are at risk. And we know we have a Torah obligation to preserve our own life. What do we do? I'm sorry to say that there's surprisingly no clear answer to the question. Some rabbis argue that if your life is more than 50% at risk, you shouldn't have to save the other person. If your life is less than 50% at risk, you're obligated to save the other person. I don't know about you, but it's tough to evaluate in any given situation whether my life is 50% or more at risk or 50% less at risk. Only God knows. Only God is omniscient or omnipotent. So what do we do? And here's where I'm going to out myself in my opinion. I'm a grandchild of Holocaust survivors. Whenever I see refugees at risk, I say it's my obligation to step forward and to care for them. Just last week, I became one of what is now, I think, 1,700 or 1,800 rabbis across the country who signed a petition saying, as Jews especially, we have an obligation to care for the refugee. We have an obligation to care for those who are in need throughout the world. Now, I'll tell you, I put this on Facebook, and a few people disagreed. And that's okay. Because in Jewish law, there's a real machloket, there's a real division. But anyone who says, you, Rabbi, are totally wrong, doesn't know their Jewish law. And anyone who says, you, Rabbi, are totally right, they don't know their Jewish law either. But nevertheless, when there's a time of questionable morality, we are called upon to take a stand. And as the grandson of Holocaust survivors, I know where I take my stand. And as a Jew who knows the Torah and who knows the story of the Exodus about which we began reading last week and continue reading this week, that one of the central lessons of the Torah is to remember that you were strangers once in the land of Egypt. And because you were strangers, because we were strangers, we have an obligation to go out of our way to care for all of those who are strangers in this world. It's not easy, and it might put our lives in jeopardy. We don't need to be foolish, and we don't need to be silly. But if I'm going to err on one side of Jewish law or on another, I'm going to err on the side of reaching out to someone whose life is truly at risk. This Shabbat of Parashat Va-Era, we actually say with some sadness, only God is truly in control and only God knows the future. So we are left here on earth to do our very best, even when we have competing issues of Jewish law. This Shabbat of Parashat Va-Era, May God bless us with wisdom. May God bless us with compassion. And most of all, this week and every week, may God bless us with peace. We say together, Amen.